from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
There's a criminal referral for the chair of the Federal Reserve. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power, as a Republican House member now accuses Jay Powell of lying to Congress, referring him to the Department of Justice today. Thanks for joining us live from Washington. I'm Joe Mathieu. We'll get an update on this from Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who is at the White House right now. And we'll look ahead to the midterms, along with a new effort to redraw congressional districts, in conversation with Kondik at Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. Analysis this hour from our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us for the duration. And we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. Charlie Pellet's got his hands on the markets in the Monday trade. Charlie, how's it look?
Right now, looking at a lot of green, Joe Mathieu. Records, in fact, for the S&P 500 index and for NASDAQ. Stocks are pushing higher, with the S&P right now up 36. That is a gain of just about 0.6% right now. Very close to session highs. We've got the Dow up 236, up 0.5%, while NASDAQ now higher by 149, up 0.7%. The start of a busy week for corporate America saw stocks climbing to records, traders looking for signs of resilience in earnings amid tariff risks. Treasury yields fell alongside the dollar, the 10-year now at 4.35%, the 2-year 3.84%. Spot gold is surging $45 the ounce, up 1.4%, $33.95. We've got West Texas Intermediate crude retreating, 66.83 a barrel, down 0.8%, and Bitcoin lower right now by 0.3% at 117,819 on Bitcoin. A busy earnings week that will include results out of Tesla and Alphabet on Wednesday. Tomorrow, Lockheed Martin and Coca-Cola. Tesla shares, they're down 0.1%. Alphabet up 2.4% ahead of earnings. Lockheed Martin shares, they're up 0.5%. Coca-Cola ahead of earnings this week, up 0.7%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. And back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks to have Charlie Pellet with us. He'll have another update on the markets coming up shortly here as we talk politics live from Washington, with our eyes on a couple of stories today, including one that is now just developing, with Fox News reporting that there is a criminal referral for the chair of the Federal Reserve. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, the Republican from Florida, putting forth this paperwork accusing Jay Powell of lying in two specific instances in congressional testimony, lying under oath, of course, talking about the renovations at the Federal Reserve building that are underway right now, that has become a bit of a controversy as the White House looks for ways to close in when it comes to Jay Powell. The president, of course, frequently mentioning his desire to fire Jay Powell. The grounds through which he may fire him on may well include this, according to Anna Paulina Luna. But this is also against the backdrop of a very chaotic time at the White House. A week from Friday is the deadline for tariffs, August 1st. We're still waiting for a number of trade deals to be announced, as we've heard from the Treasury Secretary, the Commerce Secretary, and the president himself. And much of it as well against the backdrop of a scandal involving Jeffrey Epstein, with more than 24 social media posts last evening by President Trump alone, in which he was not only celebrating the 6-month anniversary of his new term, but also putting forth videos, for instance, of former President Barack Obama, an AI video of him being arrested in the Oval Office. We want to cut through the noise here for you and get to the actual news beyond the distractions with the help of Tyler Kendall. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent is on the North Lawn of the White House right now. Tyler, what's happening in that building behind you today?
Yeah, hey, Joe. Well, it's hard to know where to start. You did a really great outline there, that there's a lot vying for perhaps the attention economy, if we could call it that, when it comes to where the White House actually wants to focus. You mentioned the trade deals, of course. This Friday will mark that 1-week mark until August 1st. And at this point, the White House hasn't given us any indication that they're going to let up on that date. Our eyes are really focused when it comes to the European Union, which has yet to get this decisive breakthrough. But it is our understanding that that EU officials are really trying to ramp up the pressure and work towards a deal because they have prepared some retaliation to go into effect if they are unable to reach a end zone when it comes to this negotiation. They, of course, are facing a 30% tariff that is higher than the 50% tariff, but still incredibly high. And our reporting indicates that in these talks, the U.S. is pushing for perhaps a baseline tariff higher than 10%, which our understanding had been the floor. Now we're seeing reports that perhaps this could end up closer to that 15% range. And this would be in exchange. The EU would accept perhaps this higher baseline tariff because they're trying to get some sort of exemptions when it comes to those sector-specific tariffs, as you well know, enacted under Section 232, national security concerns, on a totally separate legal basis track. But that would be some sort of quotas when it comes to steel and aluminum, as well as auto. So we really have seen this push from the administration. They say they're still on track for a deal. We heard Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, for example, Joe, over the weekend saying that he's optimistic that they could reach one. But then the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent earlier this morning in an interview did say that they are on track, but he did allude to the fact that this is a very difficult negotiation, but he added that it doesn't have to get ugly, Joe, in his words.
Yeah, interesting to see him out on TV this morning. What do we make about this referral from Representative Anna Paulina Luna? If anything, Tyler, I realize this isn't a White House story, but the president has kind of oscillated between these threats to fire Jay Powell and then recently saying he had no plans to do that. Remembering last summer, he told Bloomberg he wasn't going to fire the Fed chair. But when you hear a story like this, it makes you wonder.
Well, definitely. And one of my top questions to the Congresswoman would be whether or not she is working in tangent with the administration, because we really have seen this targeted pressure campaign. There's two important points of context to this. One is that we actually were expecting this. The Congresswoman had indicated last week that she likely was going to do this. And second, what a criminal referral is, it is an official step here. She is asking the Department of Justice to look into alleged misconduct, but that does not mean that the DOJ is actually going to launch an investigation. And that's going to be very important here, whether or not this is just messaging or if we're actually going to see something tangible come out of it. Now, we do know that administration officials, including the head of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, have called for other sorts of investigation. Bill Pulte, the head of the agency, told Kaylee and me last week on Balance of Power that he is confident that Congress will look into this. Of course, this has raised scrutiny or potential that perhaps the administration is laying the legal groundwork here to remove Jay Powell, because as you well know, Joe, that is a very, very high legal bar. In order to remove a Fed official, they would have to launch an investigation based on cause. But it really does seem to be adding to that growing list of criticism that this White House has for the Fed chair. Lastly, importantly, we should say that the Fed has said that Jerome Powell's testimony to Congress has only been truthful, and they have defended the renovation costs. It's our understanding that there is an inspector general that Powell has asked to look into the renovations. Really important. Great reporting, Tyler. Thank you so much. Tyler Kendall, cutting to the chase. The real news here. That's what we try to distill every day on Balance of Power. We'll let you know what the noise is, but we'll also let you know what the policy is and the news that might, in fact, drive some decisions around here, with Anna Paulina Luna adding to the noise. But again, yes, a referral is not an official action against Jay Powell. We'll let you know if something more materializes in all of this. There is some real action that's taking place in Texas this week, and it's one of the most important political stories that you might not have heard about. A special legislative session in Texas with Republican lawmakers now poised to redraw the state's congressional maps. It's taking place over the course of the coming week with an effort, a goal here, to create 5 new districts, 5 new winnable seats, if you will, for Republican lawmakers. You might have actually heard about this last week when President Trump was asked about the effort in the White House driveway. Let's listen.
5, I think we'll get 5. And there could be some other states. We're going to get another 3 or 4 or 5 in addition. Texas would be the biggest one, and that'll be 5. Just a very simple redrawing. We pick up 5 seats. But we have a couple of other states where we'll pick up seats also.
Let's see how Kyle Kondik feels about this as he looks ahead to the midterms across the valley and to the horizon. He's the managing editor of Sabato's Crystal Ball at the University of Virginia Center for Politics and author of Campaign of Chaos. Kyle, it's great to have you back here on Bloomberg TV and radio, and congratulations on the book. I wonder your thoughts on this move, specifically in Texas, because there are some other states that we want to talk about here. The idea of adding 5 new winnable seats, Donald Trump said, could be enough for Republicans to maintain control of the House. What do you say?
Yeah, look, I mean, this happened 20 years ago in Texas. The circumstances are a little bit different, but there's no prohibition on mid-decade redistricting in Texas. And so back in 2003, after Republicans took control of state government, they redrew the previous map, which was sort of a version of it was a court-drawn map, but it was kind of really a Democratic gerrymander. This time, Republicans in Texas would be modifying their own gerrymander from earlier this decade. That produced a 25-13 Republican advantage in the congressional delegation. But following the 2024 election and with the White House leaning on them, it seems possible that they can draw additional seats. And I think it looks like they're going to try. And then it's a question of what does the map look like and what's the environment next year? And do they actually realize the gains that they'd be drawing for themselves on paper?
Well, Texas is our big example here. But when you add a couple of other states, is this actually a strategy to maintain control of the House?
Yeah, it looks like it. I mean, Ohio, we already knew was going to have to draw new maps. Ohio is a very convoluted redistricting system, and the map that's currently in place was only designed or was only allowed to be in effect for two election cycles, 2022 and 2024. Republicans are basically going to have more power over the process than they did back in 2021 and 2022. Ohio has a 10-5 Republican House delegation right now. It's possible that maybe the Republicans could get that up to 12 or even 13-2. And so that's another state to watch. You know, it's possible that other states could try to reopen redistricting. Some Democrats are thinking about trying to do that, although it's harder in those states because a lot of the states where Democrats have control of state government also has some sort of restrictions on gerrymandering or an independent commission that draws the lines. You know, Texas doesn't have that, and so it's just easy for Republicans to just reopen it in Texas. It's a lot harder in a state like California, for instance.
Let's talk about California, because Governor Gavin Newsom is always waiting in the wings here. Kyle, at a moment like this, he says California, in fact, should try to counter states like Texas by redrawing its own congressional districts. Listen to what the governor said.
When Donald Trump calls in to the Texas legislature along the lines of the phone calls he made saying, find me some votes in Georgia, and says, find me 5 more seats in Texas, they're playing by a different set of rules. They can't win by the traditional game, so they want to change the game. We can act holier than thou. We could sit on the sidelines, talk about the way the world should be. Or we can recognize the existential nature that is this moment.
Let's not talk about the way the world should be. Let's talk about the way it is. In 2010, voters in California approved a measure that put the job, to your point, of drawing California's congressional map into the hands of an independent commission. So what's Gavin Newsom talking about?
Well, look, I mean, it looks like California is thinking about trying to maybe go back to the voters to ask them to grant an exception. You also could maybe make a reading of California law and say that, you know, at the start of the decade, the maps are drawn by a commission, but it doesn't necessarily say anything about the middle of the decade. Again, all this stuff would end up in court if attempted. Yes. Republicans assert that even though Democrats have, you know, that's an independent commission in California, that is still a Democratic leaning map. And there may be some truth to that, but I think it's also true that California could have an even more lopsided delegation than it already is. It's 43-9 Democratic right now, but you could potentially draw a map where the Democrats could get an extra, you know, several number of seats out of California. But the thing is there are many more hoops to jump through for Gavin Newsom and Democrats in California than there are for Governor Greg Abbott and Republicans in Texas.
Mm-hmm. You just said something important, Kyle, and that's court. That's where all this is going, right?
Oh, yeah, I would assume that, there's already an active lawsuit by Democrats and their allies over the Texas map, and there surely will be again. But, you know, these cases take forever to get sorted out. So even if there was some sort of, you know, strong legal argument to be made against the maps, maybe that isn't determined until 2028. And, you know, the White House pretty clearly is looking at this and saying, hey, how can we maximize as Republicans our chance of keeping the House in 2026, which is Trump's last midterm because he's constitutionally forbidden from running for office again in 2028. And all these moves are designed toward that goal.
Remember that vote in California 15 years ago as Arnold Schwarzenegger urged voters to terminate gerrymandering. The New York Times reminds us of this in the story that they wrote up on it. Gerrymandering has been blamed for the partisan political world that we now live in. Kyle, not to get too big picture, but this is the root of our partisan evil, is it not?
I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, I do think that, in an ideal world, I think that, Congress would create rules for redistricting that was sort of fair between the states. But the thing is that what your definition of fair might be and what my definition of fair might be could potentially differ. I will say that you do have a situation where a lot of members are in safe seats. Even in, one of the things in gerrymandering is and this is what the current Texas map really is that you have a bunch of safe Republican seats and then you have a smaller number of safe Democratic seats to the point where very few of the actual districts are competitive in general elections. And that does maybe make members a little bit more, reliant on primary voters and appealing to them as opposed to general election swing voters. But even if you had the, criteria for nonpartisan redistricting, you'd still have a bunch of safe seats. So, I think there's a lot of other things at play beyond gerrymandering, even though I think we could sort of agree that, drawing partisan lines for your own party's benefit, that's not something that's particularly appealing.
Kyle Kondik, we just spent better part of 3 months talking about cuts to Medicaid, cuts to SNAP, cuts to food stamps. And we've seen some pretty chippy town halls leading to the conventional wisdom that in an off year, it might be even more difficult for the party in power to maintain control of Capitol Hill, the House, and maybe even in this case, the Senate. What are you seeing as the ground shifts beneath our feet here and the impact that the president's big, beautiful bill will have on the midterm elections?
Look, it's an unpopular piece of legislation. I think at the very best, Republicans, won't suffer because of it. And I think it's possible they will suffer because of it. It's hard to find examples from history of, a party passing a big kind of one party piece of legislation and then, benefiting from it in the next election, in the next midterm. I think we've seen throughout 2025 that there's been, a handful of special elections here and there. And it kind of feels like 2017 did in that, the Democrats are sort of more engaged, that there was sort of the usual forces kind of working against the White House party. I think what's interesting about this potential gerrymander in Texas and some of the ripple effects of it is that it would open the possibility that there could, in fact, be a big wave against the Republicans next year, and that, for the Democrats to win the House popular vote by several points, but Republicans might still be able to hold on the House because of new gerrymanders. So that throws the House, I think, into a little bit more uncertainty.
This is why this could be fun stuff to talk about this far out. We've only got a minute left, Kyle, but I'm curious if we should be reading into fundraising yet. The NRCC outraising the DCCC in June and for all of the second quarter. Does the money matter in a world of politics like this?
I do think it matters on the margins, although, we've seen plenty of instances in recent years where, one side has a big money advantage and doesn't necessarily, that doesn't necessarily produce a victory for them. I think that, one of the things we've seen with Democrats, I think, is that, some of their fundraising may tick up, particularly as they get nominees in some of these districts that they're trying to challenge in. I think Republicans can be perfectly happy with the start they're off to in terms of fundraising. But again, I don't necessarily know if it's predictive one way or the other.
It's great to have you back, Kyle. The book, again, is Campaign of Chaos. He's managing editor Sabato's Crystal Ball at UVA's Center for Politics. And a great mind when it comes to elections. We'll be talking to Kyle a lot more as we work our way through the next year. Kyle Kondik on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. We'll assemble our political panel next. Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are on the way in. Bloomberg Politics contributors with the latest from Capitol Hill. It's straight ahead, right here on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. Indeed, it's great to see you. Things are about to get scarce around here in Washington. This is the last week, the House's last scheduled week before heading off on summer recess. The Senate is only set to go through next week, although Donald Trump would like them to work overtime. The president, in a series of Truth Social posts over the weekend, also calling on senators to work overtime, saying John Thune should, quote, cancel August recess and long weekends in order to get my incredible nominees confirmed, unquote. That could happen. there might be a little bit of overtime, but we're wondering what kind of legislation could still come out of this Congress, if anything, now that the rescissions bill has passed. The crypto legislation has been signed into law by the president, and we turn to our panel for more on this. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us. Jeanne, our Democratic analyst and senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Rick Davis, our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne, maybe you have the answer here, because the conventional wisdom is, the narrative is, Democrats feel burned and they are not willing to play ball, that Hakeem Jeffries will sit on his hands when it comes time to write a budget for the next fiscal year. Can Congress crank out anything else from this time moving forward, including a budget for next year?
I think it's looking increasingly less likely. And it is Hakeem Jeffries. It's also Chuck Schumer. And, you know, one of the things, of the many things that happened in just the last few days, was the OMB director, Russ Vought, saying that the process should be less bipartisan. And that is just another nail in the coffin, if you will. And Democrats feel, and I think rightly so, that what is the point of them negotiating these appropriations bills if they don't have assurance that it's going to be a bipartisan process, and if they don't have assurance that once they get these bills through, that they won't be clawed back? They warned Republicans about this with the rescission package passed last week, and they are getting no assurances on that. So I think that is going to make this process something that I will be surprised if we see them negotiate these bills. I think we are headed towards a attempt at a CR and possibly, unfortunately, a shutdown unless Republicans get together, take back the power of Congress to legislate, the power of the purse that they own, and to do it in a bipartisan manner and not hang the threat of rescissions over their heads once they pass a bill.
Everybody's talking about a shutdown already, Rick. We were getting into this last week ahead of the rescissions package passing. Is that the right conversation to be having right now? What are your appropriations friends telling you when it's time to get Democrats on the phone?
Well, I mean, there have been a number of successful appropriations bills get through committee. I mean, you would think right now it seems business as usual, which usually means passage of these bills, all 12 appropriations bills, by wide margins on the floor of the Senate, 67, 84 votes in order to get those things done typically. They're not seen as partisan bills. That being said, we haven't had a rescissions package in a while, and it'll be interesting to see the timing. I mean, when does the next rescission bill get submitted from the White House to Congress? Because that could be what pushes Democrats over the edge. And if Democrats say, hey, we're done, we're not going to participate in the appropriations process, and some of them have walked out of committee meetings already, then Republicans cannot legislate on their own. They can't pass a CR. They can't pass appropriations bills in advance of that. And so by definition, you're into a government shutdown. And I really kind of wonder, like, what is the Democratic plan? I mean, Schumer's not indicating one way or another whether he was going to participate in any of this. And I do think the earlier clip with the governor of California saying, you know, we play by the wrong set of rules or the different set of rules. Maybe the Senate's going to start playing by their own set of rules. So I think there's a lot up in the air. And so I think your point, we're going to see a lot of confirmations come the next 2 weeks. There are over 120 that are waiting for action. Pipeline. I feel sorry for Senator Tim Kaine, who's going to have to come in because all the Democrats will leave, he'll have to come and just object.
And that is actually going to happen? Do they work overtime till they're done?
Yeah, they will process a lot of those, if not all of them, because they can. And so get rid of the backlog. Because they really can't get anything done on the appropriations process for a while now.
Understood. Jeanne, Rick brings up a great point. Is this in fact the plan that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have put together? Because Russ Vought said if this first rescissions package passes, there's going to be another one and it's going to be bigger. That sounds to me like we've stopped talking.
Absolutely, they've stopped talking. The one thing I'll disagree with is I don't think the ball is in the Democrats' court. The ball is really in the Republicans' court. If they want to do what Russ Vought said, which is not do appropriations in a bipartisan manner, then they own this. And what we've heard from the appropriators, whether it's Murphy, whether it's Van Hollen, several others have said The reality is we need assurances that if we are going to negotiate, you're not going to claw back. If Republicans can't give those assurances, and who knows if those would be enough, by the way, but if they can't even give those assurances, what motive do Democrats have to hand over what little power they have in this process to Republicans at this point? Chuck Schumer, let's not forget, did that in March, and he was widely attacked by his own base. And I think Democrats are waking up, a little slow, but waking up to the fact that Congress and the Republicans and the president have stopped playing by normal rules and procedures when it comes to Congress. They have handed over their power to the president. And why should Democrats, they feel, play a part in that? So I do think we are likely headed for a shutdown. And I do think the Democrats just have to keep asking Republicans, do you want to play ball? Give us some assurances, and let's see if Republicans can do that.
Well, this goes both ways, Rick, as you've made the point. You get the equivalent of a line item veto for the president of the United States. That could be a Democrat at some point. And governing by reconciliation would work for Democrats just as easily. Are we, in fact, setting a new course here for Congress?
Could be. We've been passing reconciliation bills a lot over the last decades, and CRs. So a lot of this budgeting process, regular order, my favorite term, has kind of declined. But I would add, look, it's an optics thing, right? Who is actually shutting down government? Republicans are going to say, hey, look, out of committee, we passed all 12 of these appropriations bills. We're ready to take this vote for the floor, but we can't get Democrats to join us in passing them. Democrats will say, because you're not playing by the same set of rules. What rules? Rescission. Nobody understands what rescission is. So let's do a CR. We'll save the day with a CR. Democrats say, no CR. What are you doing? It's rescissions. And people will say, what's a rescission? I mean, like, if I'm Johnson and Thune and I'm sitting there having lunch trying to build legislative strategy, after I'm done laughing, I think they hold all the cards.
Wow. Jeanne, I don't know if Rick needs you for this debate anymore. He just did that pretty well with both sides for us here. Does he not have a point?
He does. He has a point, but I don't think it's an effective one. The reality is people know, and particularly the Democratic base that's going to be voting in 2026, that Republicans are in charge of the legislature. They are in charge of the White House. They don't have to think about these things like rescissions. What they have to know is that Republicans are not willing to deal with Democrats. I mean, Democrats need to ask a very simple question. Can you give us assurances that if we work with you, you will not cut our feet off in the end? And if Republicans can't give that, what incentive do Democrats have to work with them? So I think it's actually the opposite of what Rick said. If Democrats just went along because they're scared of explaining what a rescissions is, then they are going to lose. They have got to stand their ground for what we all know should be a regular process of appropriating that starts in the first branch, and the president doesn't have a line item veto, nor do these rescissions work. If they negotiate and he signs, that should be the law. So I think actually it's quite the opposite. And I won't have the conversation with myself like Rick did, and I'm no comedian, but I don't think it's that complicated to explain either.
Well, so you wonder if anything that's not budget related could emerge in this Congress. Rick, is there any policy in the form of legislation that could pass this body between now and the midterms? You've got some stuff out there. Steve Daines has a bill to rename the Washington football team the president was talking about over the weekend. I mean, could something exotic get through this body?
Yeah, first of all, it's been a pretty productive Congress in the first 6 months of Donald Trump's presidency. So it's not like it's in a gridlock. And there's no downside to just posting up another reconciliation bill in the fall.
Which has been promised.
Which has been done in the past. And I would remind Jeanne, I mean, Bill Clinton did rescission packages, and the world didn't come to a stop then. Now, granted, we did have a government shutdown, but that wasn't because of rescissions. And it is a rule that the president can actually have, and if he's got a Congress that'll go along with him, great. But at the end of the day, right now, I think the Republicans, to use a term that Donald Trump uses in the Oval Office all the time, they've got the cards.
Okay, I got a little bit nervous there. Jeanne, you're talking about assurances from the other party, in your case, the Republican Party. Isn't passing a bill and signing it into law kind of the definition of an assurance? How do you get more than that?
Well, that's a question for Republicans to answer, because that's what happened. And they came back and they took back the $9 billion. And I very well remember the past rescissions policies or practices that came to the Congress. But the difference there was something that Susan Collins talked about last week, which was that came with details about what was entailed and why this money was being pulled back. There are certainly reasons to engage in a rescissions practice, but that is not what occurred in this case. And you had Republicans asking Russ Vought for details on what was happening, why it was needed, none of which was responded to. And so that is what is needed, is you need a policy and practice in place where you can do these things in a way that are meaningful. Mm-hmm. Yes, you can appropriate money and pull it back, but you need to know why it's happening. It can't just be Donald Trump's whim because he wants the money.
Well, you do wonder what happens to assurances on money for those tribal stations Mike Rounds asked for. Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis, Bloomberg Politics contributors. You'll only hear right here on Bloomberg. Thank you for joining us here as we bring you coverage live from Washington with a lot of questions about trade in the balance here. The president, of course, staring down a roughly 2-week deadline from now to hammer out any number of trade deals that will lead us to the August 1st deadline when it comes to reciprocal tariffs. Scott Besson and others suggesting in the past couple of days we could be in for more deals between now and then. The market, as you just heard from Charlie, does not seem to be in the mode of waiting around as we carve out new highs, it seems, on a daily basis. Even with questions about tariffs beyond reciprocal, including pharmaceutical, as the president dropped the idea of maybe a 200% tariff on foreign-made drugs. I bring this up because there's a new fascinating program that's about to enter the Bloomberg lineup that has everything to do with pharmaceuticals, with health, and yes, literally longevity. That's the name of the program. David Rubenstein does it again, diving into the rapidly evolving world of medical research in his new program, Pharma Science-Backed Wellness, to uncover the facts behind the growing human pursuit of extended, healthier living. So reads the synopsis. Here's a taste of the program that debuts tomorrow here on Bloomberg.
So today, are you confident that we can, with GLP-1 drugs, actually conquer and overcome the obesity problem?
I think this is the beginning of control of body weight, in much the same way that blood pressure was controlled over the years. We're having unprecedented success in treating patients now with the older medicines and the new generation of medicines. If you look at the earlier generation of medical treatments, we were able to get 2/3 of people to lose 5% or more of their body weight. With the latest generation, semaglutide and tirzepatide, we're getting 90% or 95%.
Just a taste of the conversation with Dr. Louis Aroney, professor of metabolic research at Weill Cornell Medical College, speaking with David Rubenstein, who joins us right now live from World Headquarters in New York. David, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming back on the program. We spend so much time talking about this, and I wonder what's making you invest in it now. Why are we all so consumed with our own mortality?
Well, as people get older, they generally want to live longer. Most people do. I think it's been going on for a millennium. But now we have the ability, with medications and pharmaceutical products and lifestyle changes, to actually affect how long we live. So in the year, let's say 400,000 years ago, when humans were coming out of caves as Homo sapiens, the life expectancy was 20. Today in the United States, the life expectancy is roughly 77. But somebody born today from a good zip code, good ethnicity, can probably live to 85 to 90. But people today who are already in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, what they want to do is live longer. And it's possible now because of drugs, more knowledge about weight, more knowledge about pharmaceuticals, more knowledge about so many different lifestyle changes that one could adopt, that you can live longer. And so this series is about how people can affect the time that they spend on the face of the earth. So that's what it's all about.
We selected that clip on GLP-1s, which has been such a fascinating story over the past couple of years. David, a cure-all. If you ask certain people, everything from fatty liver to diabetes to obesity to sleep apnea. Have we ever seen something like this that's been approved for so many things? And to what extent does this advance our conversation about advancing our age?
Well, we all remember in school that penicillin was discovered as an accident. And we later learned that penicillin turned out to be one of the great miracle drugs of all time and saved many, many lives, of course, around the world, and still does. GLP-1 drugs were originally designed to deal with diabetes and the effects of diabetes. But it turns out that they have more significant effects than just dealing with diabetes. They can also make you lose a fair amount of weight in a way that's responsible, but also they can probably extend your life. And now more and more research is being done to show that GLP-1 drugs can probably save you many, many years on the face of the earth. You can live longer. And so many, many doctors are now beginning to prescribe it, not just for obesity, but for other related things that people can deal with.
You're no stranger to politics, of course, David Rubenstein, and I'm wondering if it's possible in this political climate we're in to talk about health in an era when Donald Trump's talking about MAHA and RFK Jr. is questioning certain sciences, if it's possible to talk about our health without bumping into politics.
Well, in Washington, D.C., everything revolves around politics to some extent. But generally, the most important thing I think we should recognize is that the purpose of government is to promote the general welfare. That's what it says in our Constitution. And what promotes the general welfare better than helping people to live longer and living healthier? And that's what health is all about. We have the finest medications in the United States, the finest health care in the United States. We just to make sure that people get access to it. And that's what the debate often is about in Washington. Who's going to get access to the health care and how much are they going to pay for it? But what I'm trying to do with this series is just be sure people realize that it is possible. Through changing your lifestyle, through taking some medications, you can live longer than you otherwise would live. And that's something that generally people all over the world want to do more than anything else. People want to have a happy life, a healthy life, and a longer life.
Yeah. Well, it's pretty remarkable how simple that is. And you wonder what happens to GLP-1s, what else they could be approved for if there's an oral version or so forth. But, David, there's a lot of debate in Washington right now about a number of things, including pharmaceuticals, including whether they should be tariffed, as I said at the beginning of our conversation here. And I have to ask you about the way the market is looking at all of this, because you're David Rubenstein. When you see the markets continuing to see new highs in the face of such uncertainty as we've been told, what do you make of this moment, the psychology in the markets, knowing that August 1st is less than 2 weeks away? Is this market more sophisticated, a better sense of what's real and what's noise than the political class in Washington?
Well, the market generally is a pretty good indicator of what people are thinking. As a general rule of thumb, I think most CEOs in most large companies today do not know what the impact of tariffs is really going to be. And so it really hasn't factored in that much yet to most companies. Many of the companies that my own firm has under our control don't yet see the need to raise prices to deal with the tariffs because the tariffs aren't yet solidified in terms of what they're going to be. But I think most people in the market generally think the tariffs will be tolerable and probably some prices can be passed along and maybe some others can't. But I don't think most people feel that the tariffs are now a barrier to continued economic growth.
That's fascinating. How about the idea of Donald Trump as chairman of the board, having seen him make moves on specific companies? Take a look at what he's said about Tim Cook, for instance, at Apple. It's time to move your manufacturing here, and I need you to do it by this date. David is the co-founder of Carlyle. How should board members or people in the C-suite prepare for that type of environment?
Well, there is a manufacturing deficit now in the United States. There's no doubt that manufacturing has moved offshore over the last 20 to 30 years because it's very efficient to manufacture things at lower prices offshore. There's no doubt that many CEOs are now beginning to onshore some manufacturing, but we have to be realistic about it. It takes many, many years to build manufacturing facilities in the United States, so it may be some time before much manufacturing is going to come back here. But I suspect some companies are going to manufacture some things in the United States they otherwise would not, but some are going to give lip service to it, and some are not really going to pay that much attention to it. In the end, I suspect there will be more manufacturing in the United States 3 or 4 years from now than there is today, but a lot less than there was 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, it's pretty great to have you with us here, and I'll point everyone back to the new show. It's called Longevity, debuts tomorrow here on Bloomberg, hosted by the great David Rubenstein. Carlyle, co-founder, host of another program that you know a lot about called Peer to Peer on Bloomberg TV and radio and on Bloomberg Wealth. David, great to have you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
With us from world headquarters in New York, as we add the voice of Anurag Rana at Bloomberg Intelligence for an interesting story that we just wanted to plant a flag on here. Speaking of markets at new highs, you've been watching Microsoft, likely one of the most widely held stocks on Wall Street, even as it talks about a massive hack that has taken place with its technology. Pretty remarkable in this case, and Anurag is watching this for us with a new weakness detected, targeted by hackers in Microsoft's Sharepoint servers. Anurag, thanks for joining us. How significant is this breach, and why isn't the stock showing it?
Yeah, no, we don't think it's that big of a deal compared to what happened last year with CrowdStrike. In this particular case, it's one particular software package, and that's also on the on-premise version of it that's having some weakness, and they already released a patch to it. One of the things we have often said is, you know, software that runs on the cloud is far better in terms of security, you could say prevention, than that's on the premises of a particular company or a corporation. So I think there is a little bit of a, I would say, headline risk there, but nothing to be as concerned about what we saw a year ago.
It's kind of amazing how, I guess, forgiving investors can be when it comes to this matter. Looking at CrowdStrike, the way that it's rebounded from its outage a little more than a year ago. Is this something that investors have just learned to take in stride when it comes to cyber?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about it. When you come look at cybersecurity, I would be very surprised that there isn't a company out there, or there isn't a large tech company that doesn't get breached over time. I mean, they are facing hundreds and thousands of attacks per day, and one or two of them may get across. I think if you look at it in totality, cybersecurity is probably one of the biggest risks that we face, from a software point of view. And, someday we won't be surprised if a particular cloud service goes down, and along with that, it takes down a lot of other areas as well. So I think you're absolutely right. People are learning how to live with it, but there is an important risk for everybody to look at.
That's a big industry as well. Anurag, talk to me about the IPO market and Figma Incorporated. This is an app design and collaboration software company that is apparently going to be listing here in one of the biggest debuts of the year.
Yeah, if you remember a few years ago, Adobe had acquired Figma, or made an acquisition bid for about $20 billion, which after some regulatory scrutiny did not go through, and Adobe ended up paying about $1 billion in breakup fee to Figma. At that point, people try to understand what this company does. And at that time, I think the revenue run rate was somewhere around the 200 million mark. But just in a few years, we are now seeing a much more rapid growth rate. We think they can generate somewhere north of $1.5 billion by the end of 2026. So that's a very big number, really fast growth rate. I think this is one of the most sought out IPOs in the software world this year.
That's something else. What's the timeline? Do we know when this deal goes public?
No, I think they're just updating the S1s at this point. I don't have a good idea of when it's going to get priced, but given the stage of the market where we are, you've seen valuations are fairly high for the tech companies right now. I won't be surprised if they want to get it done as soon as possible before before the market worsens. I mean, we don't know how the market conditions shape up over the next few months. So I think in these conditions, when you have a good end market, people want to get it out as soon as possible.
Makes a lot of sense. FIG would be the ticker. Anurag, great to see you. Anurag Rana with Bloomberg Intelligence, our senior technology analyst at World Headquarters in New York. We thank you, as always, for the insights here. Donald Trump just posting to Truth Social about the Harvard case that is opening today at the federal courthouse in Boston. He writes, the Harvard case just tried in Massachusetts before an Obama-appointed judge. She is a total disaster, which I say even before hearing her ruling. I guess we won't wait for that, but we will have a lot more coming up a little bit later on today on the late edition of Balance of Power. That's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Join me and Tyler Kendall live from Washington with much more here when it comes to politics in Washington and what's happening in Texas, the special legislative session getting underway that could create 5 new winnable Republican congressional districts, what it means for the midterms.